Welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we were uncovering those fascinating but sometimes misleading cognitive biases.
Yeah, it's amazing how these mental shortcuts can lead us astray, even in fields like science and research.
That's interesting because I always thought of science as being all about objectivity, like removing human bias.
Well, you'd think so, right?
hmm
But scientists are human too, so they can be susceptible to these little cognitive quirks just like anyone else.
So even in a controlled lab environment, biases can still sneak in.
Absolutely. That's why it's super important for researchers to be aware of these biases and use strategies to, lessen their impact.
Okay, so what kind of biases can actually affect scientific research? Can you give me some examples?
Sure. There's statistical bias, which can come from things like using an unrepresentative sample group or making mistakes when calculating averages.
So, if a study only includes a small part of the population, the results might not apply to everyone else.
Exactly. And then there's selection bias, which can happen when researchers aren't careful about choosing who or what they study.
Sounds like that could really skew the results.
Definitely. And then we've got something called the clustering illusion, which is this tendency to see patterns in random data, even when there aren't any real patterns.
No, I do that all the time, like when I see the same number on the clock over and over again.
Right. It's a really common thing. But in research, it can lead scientists down the wrong path, making them chase correlations that aren't actually there.
So it's like our brains are hardwired to look for patterns, even if they're just illusions.
Exactly. Then there's reporting bias, which happens when the importance of a study's findings influences how they're presented or published.
So, a study with exciting or groundbreaking results might get more attention, even if the research itself isn't that solid.
It's definitely possible. And finally, we have the observer effect, which is when the researcher's presence or expectations actually change the behavior of the people they're studying.
It's like when you know someone's watching you, so you start acting differently, even if you don't mean to.
Precisely. All of these biases can affect how reliable scientific research is, which really highlights the need for strong research methods, careful analysis, and a healthy dose of skepticism.
So even in science, it's a constant battle against bias. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about everyday life. How do these biases affect how we handle all the information we get from the news, social media, just the world around us?
That's a great question. And it leads us to a particularly interesting bias called truth bias.
Truth bias. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's basically our natural tendency to believe what we see and hear, at least initially.
Wait, so you're saying we're wired to believe everything? That sounds kind of dangerous, especially in the age of fake news and all that.
You're right. Truth bias can definitely make us vulnerable to deception, but it also plays an important role in how we function as a society.
I'm not sure I follow. How can blindly believing everything be a good thing?
Well, imagine if we constantly questioned and doubted everything we heard. Communication would be so much harder, and it would be nearly impossible to cooperate with each other.
I guess it would be pretty exhausting to fact check every conversation we have.
Exactly. So truth bias helps society run smoothly. But in today's world, with all the information out there, it's super important to develop those critical thinking skills and be more careful about what we choose to believe.
So how do we find that balance, between our natural tendency to believe and the need to be skeptical and critical?
That's where the source material offers some helpful advice. It emphasizes the importance of reading a variety of sources, watching documentaries, and exposing ourselves to different perspectives.
So instead of staying in our own little bubbles, we should actively seek out different points of view.
Exactly. And when you come across new information, ask yourself, is this from a reliable source? What are they trying to get me to believe? Does this make sense based on what I already know?
So we need to become information detectives, carefully examining everything before making up our minds.
That's a great way to put it. The source material also talks about the importance of really listening to people and paying attention to how they communicate.
So it's not just what they say, but how they say it.
Right. Are they giving you facts, or are they using emotional language to persuade you?
Kind of like the difference between a news report and a sales pitch.
Exactly. And being able to tell the difference between those two is super important in today's world. The key is to stay curious, challenge what you think you know, and keep learning.
So being skeptical without being cynical, finding that balance between trusting our gut and using our critical thinking skills.
You got it. And here's where things get really interesting. The source material connects understanding biases with achieving something called the Sustainable Development Goals.
The Sustainable Development Goals. I'm not familiar with those. What are they?
They're a set of 17 goals adopted by the United Nations in 2015. The idea is to create a more sustainable future for everyone. They cover a wide range of topics, like ending poverty and hunger, promoting health and education, ensuring gender equality, and taking action on climate change.
Wow, that sounds incredibly ambitious. But what do these goals have to do with understanding biases?
The source material argues that by becoming aware of our own biases, especially those cognitive biases, we can better understand our behaviors and motivations.
So, recognizing how our biases might be shaping our actions, even in ways we don't realize.
Exactly. And once we have that awareness, we can start making more conscious choices that are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals.
So, it's like using our knowledge of biases as a tool to create a more sustainable and just world.
Precisely. It's about understanding that our individual choices and actions, even the small ones, can contribute to a larger effort.
That's a powerful thought. Reminds us that we all have a role to play in making the world a better place.
It really does. It shows how individual action, combined with a deeper understanding of ourselves and our biases, can make a positive impact.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about. Feels like we've just scratched the surface, though.
We have. But becoming aware is the first step. And the more we learn about these concepts, the better we'll be able to navigate the world around us.
Well, I'm definitely ready to keep exploring.